Hello there, my name's Sarah. I'm 27 and I've been working as a nurse for a while. My life has been a whirlwind of hospital shifts, patient checkups, and endless cups of coffee. The hospital corridors have been my world, and my social life? Well, that's been on life support for a while now. So, what's a girl to do when she's got no time to meet people the old-fashioned way? She goes online. I signed up for this dating site, nothing fancy, just one of those places where you hope to find someone who's not a complete weirdo. That's where I bumped into Ryan, virtually of course. His profile was plain, no show-off stuff. Just a guy with a genuine smile and a twinkle in his eyes. We started trading messages, and something clicked. We decided to meet up, see if this online chemistry had any basis in the real world. Our first date was at this cozy little cafe downtown. I walked in, and there he was, waiting for me. "Hey Sarah, you made it," he greeted, his face lighting up like a kid on Christmas morning. I was a bundle of nerves, but his easygoing nature calmed me down. We started chatting, just casual stuff at first. He was a software engineer, loved messing around with codes and all that. He was passionate about his work, but when he spoke about his mother, Margaret, his demeanor changed. "I'm all she's got, you know," he said, his voice dropping a bit. "My old man skipped out on us when I was just a kid. She's been alone since then. I try to help out, send her $1,000 every month. Ain't much, but it keeps her going." I admired his dedication, his sense of responsibility. I shared my own stories, about the grueling hours at the hospital, the emotional roller coaster that my job often was. He listened, really listened, not just nodding along. His eyes were full of understanding, and I felt a connection. As the weeks rolled by, I found myself falling for this guy. He was different, caring and attentive. He'd show up at the hospital when I was pulling late-night shifts, always with a hot meal in tow. He was a breath of fresh air in my otherwise monotonous life. One evening, while we were having dinner at his place, he looked at me, his eyes serious. "Sarah," he said, holding my hand across the table. "I've been doing some thinking. I really like you, more than just a girlfriend. I want us to be a team, you and me. What do you say, will you marry me?" His question caught me off guard. Sure, we hadn't been dating for too long, but there was no denying the love I felt for him. So, I said yes. We were over the moon, excited about our future together. But, boy, was I in for a ride. Little did I know that this decision would lead me down a path full of twists and turns. Life took a sudden turn after that dinner. I was now engaged to Ryan, a man I'd met online, who was as kind and caring as he was committed to his mom. The word fiancé had a new, exciting ring to it. We decided it was time to meet his mom, a woman who lived a couple of hours away in a small town. She was the epicenter of Ryan's world, the person whose opinion mattered the most to him. So, the plan was set: a weekend trip for the two of us to meet the woman who had raised my soon-to-be husband. The drive was filled with a strange tension. Ryan was visibly nervous, his fingers drumming on the steering wheel, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror more often than necessary. He was a man on edge, and it wasn't hard to guess why. "Ryan," I said, trying to soothe his nerves. "Relax. I'm sure your mom is a wonderful person." He shot me a half-smile, his eyes still on the road. "Yeah, she's something all right." His mom's house was a picture of quaint charm, a small structure that looked like it had jumped straight out of a home and garden magazine. As we pulled up, I saw her waiting for us on the porch, a frail figure with a spark of defiance in her eyes. "Ryan, my boy," Margaret exclaimed as soon as we got out of the car, enveloping him in a tight hug. After a moment, she turned to me, her gaze icy. "You must be Sarah." I extended a hand, forcing a smile. "Yes, ma'am. It's a pleasure to meet you." The afternoon was a whirlwind of conversation, a deep dive into Ryan's life and his mom's sacrifices. She painted a vivid picture of their shared journey, of the struggles they'd overcome together. It was touching, but also a bit overwhelming. "So, Sarah," she said at one point, her eyes boring into me. "Ryan tells me you're a nurse." I nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I work at the city hospital." "And your family?" she asked, her gaze never wavering. "Who do you have?" I swallowed, a lump forming in my throat. I don't remember my parents. My grandmother raised me." She nodded, her eyes softening a bit. "Well, I suppose we all have our crosses to bear." The conversation took a strange turn then. She talked about blessing our marriage, but on one condition. We had to keep sending her the monthly $1,000. I was taken aback. I knew Ryan helped her out, but this felt different. It felt like a transaction. "Ma," Ryan said, his voice firm. "We're planning to get married, not sign a contract." Margaret shot him a stern look. "This is not a negotiation, Ryan. It's what I need." Ryan looked at me, his eyes pleading. It was a tough situation, one that I didn't want to escalate. So, I agreed. I agreed to this bizarre condition, for Ryan's sake. The wedding planning kicked off with a bang. Ryan and I were excited, brimming with ideas and dreams for our big day. We had decided on a simple ceremony, something that reflected our love and commitment without breaking the bank. After all, we had a significant monthly commitment to Ryan's mom, which kept our budget modest. But love, we believed, didn't need an extravagant show. Our venue was the local church, a charming little structure with an air of warmth and familiarity. Father John, the pastor and a dear friend of Ryan's, was more than willing to officiate our wedding. His twinkling eyes and hearty congratulations made us feel even more special. The guest list was a short one, a handful of work friends, Ryan's childhood buddies, and, of course, his mom. Margaret had a strong presence in our lives, and her involvement in the wedding planning was no different. She was there at every turn, her opinions shaping our choices, from the color scheme to the menu. "I think we should serve roast beef," she declared during one of our planning sessions. "Ryan loves it." Ryan, ever the dutiful son, nodded in agreement. "But Mom," he added, "Sarah's a vegetarian. We need to consider her too." His mom simply raised an eyebrow. "Well, it's your wedding too, isn't it?" Ryan didn't argue. He simply agreed and let his mom have her way. I didn't mind much. I was too caught up in the joy of marrying the man I loved. But there was another person who was deeply involved in our wedding planning, my grandmother. She was my rock, my guiding light. She had raised me single-handedly, and her wisdom and strength had always been my inspiration. Grandma was thrilled about the wedding. She helped me pick out a simple but elegant white dress. She baked cookies for the reception, her hands working magic in the kitchen. And she was there, always there, with a smile and a word of encouragement. The day of the wedding was a whirlwind of emotions. I was nervous, excited, and a little overwhelmed. Ryan looked dashing in his blue suit, his eyes sparkling with joy. His mom, in a striking red dress, was the life of the party, chatting and laughing with everyone. The ceremony was a beautiful, heartwarming affair. Father John spoke eloquently about love and commitment, his words resonating with everyone present. As Ryan and I exchanged our vows, I could see tears in Grandma's eyes. It was a moment I would cherish forever. The reception, held in the church hall, was a fun-filled event. The roast beef was a hit, and even though I couldn't partake, I was happy to see everyone enjoying it. Ryan's mom made sure to remind everyone that it was her idea. I didn't mind. I was too caught up in the joy of the day. As the day came to a close, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. We were married. We were starting a new chapter in our lives. I knew there would be challenges, but I was ready to face them. I had Ryan, and I had Grandma. I was ready for whatever life had in store for us. In the weeks following our wedding, Ryan and I were on cloud nine. We had moved into a small rented apartment and were slowly settling into our new life together. Our days were filled with love and laughter, and our nights with dreams of a future we were eager to build together. One of our major goals was to save for a down payment on a house. We had a plan, a budget, and a piggy bank that we lovingly called our future home. Every penny we saved was a step closer to our dream. But our financial plan had a significant dent: the $1,000 we sent to Ryan's mom every month. Ryan's mom was a constant presence in our lives, and not always a welcome one. She had a knack for showing up unannounced, often with a list of complaints and demands. Her favorite topic was her financial struggles and how we needed to help her more. One evening, she arrived at our apartment with a stack of papers. "Ryan, dear," she began, her voice dripping with sweetness, "we need to discuss something." Ryan, ever the obedient son, sat down with her, a look of concern on his face. "What is it, Mom?" he asked. She slid a paper across the table to him. "I need you to sign this," she said. It was a contract, a formal agreement that we, all the time we're married, would continue to send her $1,000 every month. But that wasn't all. She also wanted us to cover her utility bills, and part of other costs. Ryan was taken aback. "Mom, we're already helping you out every month. We can't afford all this," he protested. She simply shrugged. "You'll find a way," she said, her voice cold and unfeeling. I was speechless. The audacity of her demand was shocking. But before I could react, Ryan had already signed the contract. He looked at me apologetically. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he said. "I didn't see this coming." I was seething with anger, not at Ryan, but at his mother. She was exploiting us, and it wasn't fair. "This isn't right," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "You can't just demand money from us like this." She simply smirked. "I just did." The drive home was a silent one. I was too angry, and Ryan was too guilty. Our dream of owning a home seemed to be slipping away, replaced by a growing pile of bills and obligations. Life was a non-stop roller coaster ride with Ryan and his mother. No matter what we did, it felt like we were always under her microscope, and every move we made was met with her disapproval. It was suffocating, and it was starting to eat away at our happiness. The situation reached boiling point one evening when she came over for her usual uninvited visit. Ryan and I had been discussing the possibility of starting a family. We were excited about the idea of bringing a new life into this world. But when I shared our plans with his mother, her reaction was far from supportive. "A baby? Are you two nuts?" Margaret bellowed, her face turning an alarming shade of red. "You can barely keep your heads above water, and now you want to add a baby to this circus?" I was taken aback by her outburst. "We've thought about this, and we believe we're ready," I countered, trying to keep my voice calm. She snorted. "Ready? You think you're ready? You can't even handle your own lives, and now you want to toss a baby into the mix?" I turned to Ryan, hoping he would step in, but he just sat there, his face ashen. His mother's words had struck a nerve, and he seemed lost for words. "Instead of thinking about a baby, you should be thinking about me," she continued, her voice rising with each word. "I'm not getting any younger. I need you to take care of me, not some snot-nosed brat." I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me. "We're not your babysitters," I snapped, my patience wearing thin. "We have our own lives to live. And we won't let you dictate them." Margaret turned to Ryan, tears welling up in her eyes. "Is this how you treat your mother? Is this how you repay me for all I've done for you?" Ryan looked at me, then at his mother. I could see the turmoil in his eyes. He was caught between his loyalty to his mother and his love for me. Finally, he spoke up. "Mom's right, Sarah," he said, his voice wavering. "We're not ready for a baby. We have too many responsibilities already." His words were like a punch to the gut. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I turned to him, my eyes filled with disbelief. "So, you're taking her side now?" He didn't answer, just looked down at his hands. That was all the answer I needed. I got up and stormed out of the room, leaving Ryan and his mother alone. That night, Ryan and I had the biggest argument we've ever had. We yelled, we cried, we said things we didn't mean. But in the end, nothing was resolved. He still sided with his mother, and I was left feeling betrayed and alone. The following weeks were a nightmare. Ryan's mother was more intrusive than ever, and Ryan was more distant. As a result, I just stopped communicating with Margaret, even if it was rude, but not seeing her was already a great achievement. She called me an impudent girl and stopped calling me too. I'd been noticing a change in Ryan for a while. He was always on his phone, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he sent text after text. He was coming home late from work, his excuse always the same, "Just got caught up at the office, babe." I didn't want to believe anything was wrong. I tried to convince myself that it was just work stress, that he was just busy. But deep down, I knew something was off. My suspicions were confirmed when my best friend, Lisa, called me one evening. "Sarah, I don't know how to say this," she began, her voice shaking. "I found Ryan's profile on that dating site we used to use." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "What? That's impossible," I stammered, my mind racing. "He wouldn't." "I'm sorry, Sarah," Lisa said, her voice filled with sympathy. "I thought you should know." I hung up the phone, my hands shaking. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was right there. When Ryan came home that night, I confronted him. "Who is she, Ryan?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. "Who are you texting all the time? Who are you meeting on that dating site?" Ryan looked at me, his face pale. "I don't know what you're talking about, Sarah," he stammered, his eyes darting around the room. "Don't lie to me, Ryan," I yelled, my patience wearing thin. "I know about the dating site. I know you're seeing someone else." Ryan didn't say anything for a moment, just stared at me. Then, he let out a sigh. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want you to find out this way." I felt a surge of anger. "So, you admit it? You've been cheating on me?" Ryan nodded, his eyes filled with guilt. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I didn't mean for this to happen. It just did." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The man I loved, the man I had planned to start a family with, was cheating on me. And to make matters worse, he wasn't even sorry about it. "I want a divorce, Ryan," I said, my voice steady. "I can't be with someone I can't trust." Ryan didn't argue, didn't try to convince me to stay. He just nodded, his face a mask of guilt and regret. 6 months had passed since my divorce from Ryan, and life was starting to settle into a new rhythm. I was learning to live alone, to be independent. Then, my grandmother passed away. She'd been a rock in my life, a woman of strength and wisdom. Her passing left me with a gaping hole, but also, unexpectedly, a considerable inheritance. She'd left me her old mansion, a beautiful house with vast gardens and rooms filled with antique furniture. And there was also a hefty sum of money, enough to let me live comfortably for the rest of my life. I was shocked, overwhelmed, but also grateful. It was a fresh start, a chance to rebuild my life. Just as I was starting to adjust to this new reality, there was a knock on the door. Standing on my doorstep was none other than Ryan's mother, a woman who'd always been a thorn in my side. "Well, look at you, living in luxury," she sneered, looking around the mansion with greedy eyes. "I heard about your little windfall. You must be over the moon." I crossed my arms, raising an eyebrow at her. "What do you want, Margaret?" She put on a saccharine smile, her eyes still scanning the house. Well, dear, I thought it's only fair that since you and my son are married, I should get a share of this fortune. I couldn't help but laugh. Margaret, you're out of the loop. Ryan and I divorced 6 months ago. Her eyes widened, and she sputtered. What? No, that can't be right. Ryan would have told me. Call him and ask, I suggested, leaning against the doorframe. He'll confirm it. She pulled out her phone, dialed Ryan's number, and put it on speaker. Ryan, tell me it's not true, she demanded when he answered. Tell me you and Sarah are still married. There was a pause, and then Ryan's voice came through, sounding resigned. No, Mom, we're not. We divorced 6 months ago. Ryan's mom ended the call, her face pale. You've made a fool of me, she said, her voice trembling. And you, Ryan, you're an idiot for letting this gold mine slip through your fingers. With that, she turned on her heel and stormed off, leaving me standing in the doorway, shaking with laughter. It felt good to finally stand up to Margaret, to see her taken down a peg. I'd been through a lot, but I was coming out the other side stronger, more confident. My new life was just beginning, and I was ready for whatever came next. I had a beautiful house, financial security, and most importantly, I was free from the shackles of an unhappy marriage. As I closed the door, I couldn't help but smile. Life was looking up. The sun had already started to set when I heard the knock. I opened the door to find my ex-husband, Ryan, standing there. His sudden appearance was as surprising as it was unwelcome. What the hell are you doing here, Ryan? I asked, my voice laced with annoyance. I heard about your inheritance, Sarah, he stammered, his eyes darting around the grand entrance of the mansion. Is it true? I crossed my arms over my chest, raising an eyebrow at him. Yeah, it's true. My grandmother left me her house and a substantial amount of money. What's it to you? Ryan swallowed hard, his gaze never leaving mine. I was thinking, maybe we could give it another shot, Sarah, he said, his voice shaky. I've been a fool. I let my mother dictate our lives. I didn't stand up for you when I should have. I want to make it right. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. Oh, now you want to make it right? I asked, shaking my head in disbelief. Now that I'm rich, you suddenly want to be a better man? You think I can't see right through you, Ryan? Ryan looked taken aback by my words, but he quickly composed himself. It's not like that, Sarah, he said, his voice filled with desperation. I've changed. I can be a better man. I can make it up to you. I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. I could see the greed in his eyes, the dollar signs practically flashing in his pupils. He was no different from his arrogant mother. He was just after my money. Listen here, Ryan, I said, my voice cold as ice. You had your chance. You blew it. Now, you want to waltz back into my life because I've come into some money? You're even more pathetic than I thought. Ryan flinched at my words, but he didn't back down. I just want to make it right, Sarah, he pleaded, his voice barely above a whisper. I just want another chance. I shook my head, a humorless smile on my face. You're not getting another chance, Ryan, I said, my voice steady. You're not getting a dime of my money. Now get off my property before I call the cops. With that, I slammed the door in his face, leaving him standing on the doorstep. I could hear him calling out to me, begging for forgiveness, but I ignored him. I had better things to do than listen to his empty promises and pleas. I walked away from the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I'd finally stood up to Ryan, to his manipulations and his lies. I'd finally stood up for myself. In the weeks that followed, I found myself thinking about Ryan less and less. I was moving on, slowly but surely. I was building a new life for myself, a life that was mine and mine alone. I made new friends, people who liked me for who I was, not for my money or my mansion. I started volunteering at a local animal shelter, finding joy in helping those who couldn't help themselves. I was finally living my life on my own terms, and it felt amazing.
The news hit me like a sledgehammer to the gut. My husband, Rowan, had just received a call that his estranged uncle, the wealthy business magnate Jonathan Winthrop, had passed away. Your uncle named you as one of the primary beneficiaries in his will, the lawyer on the other end announced. Rowan's eyes widened in disbelief. My uncle? But we haven't spoken in over a decade. Are you certain? Quite certain, Mr. Blackwood. You and your wife are requested to attend the reading of the will tomorrow. As the call ended, Rowan turned to me, his expression a mix of shock and confusion. Alara, this could be our chance to turn things around. Uncle Jonathan's fortune could save our struggling business. I forced a smile, trying to mirror his cautious optimism, but a knot of unease twisted in my stomach. Nothing in life came without a price, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this unexpected windfall would demand a heavy toll. The next day, we found ourselves in the opulent study of Jonathan Winthrop's sprawling mansion, surrounded by his legal team and other potential beneficiaries. As the lawyer started reading the will, a hush fell over the room. To my estranged nephew, Rowan Blackwood, and his wife, Alara, I bequeath my entire estate, including this property and all assets, on one condition. My heart raced as the lawyer paused for dramatic effect. Rowan squeezed my hand, his palm clammy. They must take up permanent residence in this mansion for a period of no less than 1 year. A collective gasp filled the room, but one voice rose above the others, dripping with venom. This is an outrage, Rowan's mother, Margot, spat. That inheritance is rightfully mine. I'm Jonathan's only living relative. Her eyes locked onto me, filled with undisguised hatred. This is that little gold digger's doing, I'm sure of it. Rowan stepped forward, his jaw clenched. Mother, you have no right. Don't you dare take her side, you ungrateful whelp. Margot hissed, her words slicing like knives. The lawyer cleared his throat, attempting to restore order. The terms are clear, Mrs. Winthrop. If Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood fail to meet the residence requirement, the entire estate will be distributed among various charities. Margot's eyes narrowed dangerously. Mark my words, you'll regret this. That mansion and everything in it belong to me by rights. I'll make your life a living hell until you surrender what's mine. As her gaze bored into me, a chill ran down my spine. I knew, in that moment, our lives had taken an irrevocable turn, and the battle lines had been drawn. A week later, we stood before the looming gates of Winthrop Manor, our new home, or gilded cage as it felt. The ancient stone edifice seemed to stare down at us, its Gothic spires like accusing fingers against the slate-gray sky. Are you sure about this? I asked Rowan, my grip tightening on his hand. He offered a grim smile. We don't have a choice if we want a future. Just promise me you'll be careful around Mother. As if on cue, the gates creaked open, and Margot emerged from the shadows like a specter, her expression a rictus of disdain. So the prodigal son returns, she sneered, and he brings his little bride into my home. I fought the urge to recoil as her eyes raked over me with undisguised loathing. This is Uncle Jonathan's home now, Mother, Rowan said, his voice strained. We're here to honor his wishes. His wishes? Margot barked a harsh laugh. That senile old fool was manipulated in his final days, no thanks to your scheming wife, I'm sure. Before I could respond, she stepped closer, her face inches from mine. Listen closely, you conniving little tramp. This is my domain, and I'll make your life a waking nightmare until you slink back to whatever hovel you crawled out of. Rowan pulled me back, shielding me with his body. That's enough, Mother. You've gone too far. Margot's lips curled into a cruel smile. We'll see about that. As she turned and stormed back towards the manor, I felt a shiver run down my spine. The games had begun. Over the following weeks, Margot's campaign of subtle torment intensified. Priceless heirlooms went missing, only to reappear in bizarre locations. Strange noises echoed through the halls at night, keeping me awake. And the servants treated me with thinly veiled contempt, no doubt following Margot's lead. She's just trying to rattle you, Rowan insisted. But I could see the doubt creeping into his eyes. One night, as I descended the grand staircase, I felt a violent shove from behind. I tumbled down the steps, searing pain lancing through my body as I crashed to the marble floor. When I finally regained my senses, Margot was standing over me, a sickening grin plastered across her face. "Clumsy girl," she purred. "You should be more careful." As she turned and walked away, I felt a cold certainty settle in my gut. This was no longer a game to her. Margot was willing to go to any lengths to drive me out, even if it meant destroying me in the process. After the accident on the stairs, I knew I couldn't trust anyone in that house. Except perhaps Rowan, but even his loyalty was becoming strained by his mother's vicious campaign against me. I took to wandering the manor's shadowy corridors at night when everyone else was asleep, searching for any clue that could expose Margot's true motives. On one such foray, I discovered a hidden door behind an antique bookcase, leading to a dust-covered study that seemed untouched for decades. Inside, I found a trove of old letters and documents, including correspondence between Margot and Jonathan in their younger years. What I read made my blood run cold. It appeared Margot had been stealing from the family fortune for years through elaborate financial schemes, only to be cut off by Jonathan when he uncovered her deceit. As I dug deeper, I also uncovered evidence that Margot had once been involved with a shady business partner of Jonathan's, a man who later disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Had Margot gone so far as to have him killed to cover her tracks? Armed with this damning information, I knew I had to confront her, once and for all. But when I tried to show the evidence to Rowan, he refused to believe his beloved mother was capable of such depravity. "These letters prove nothing," he snapped, pushing the documents away. "Mother has been nothing but generous and loving her entire life. I think you're allowing your imagination to run wild." "Don't be a fool, Rowan," I cried, my frustration boiling over. "Can't you see she's manipulating you, just like she's been doing your entire life?" His jaw tightened, and I realized I'd struck a nerve. "Get out. I need some time alone to think about all of this." As I left him brooding in the study, a pit of dread opened in my stomach. Margot's web of lies was so intricately woven, so deeply rooted in Rowan's psyche, that I feared nothing short of a miracle could make him see the truth. In the days that followed, strange occurrences began plaguing me again. More missing valuables, eerie scratching sounds from behind the walls, and an increasing sense of being watched. I knew Margot was behind it all, but I could never catch her in the act. Then, one evening, the servants began whispering about a scandalous story that had surfaced in the local papers, depicting me as a shameless gold digger who had ensnared Rowan through nefarious means. The vicious lies left me reeling, and I knew Margot's hand was behind this public defamation. When I confronted Rowan about it, he seemed conflicted, torn between his loyalty to me and his ingrained devotion to his mother. "Perhaps it would be best if you left for a while," he said, unable to meet my eyes, "at least until this blows over." As I stared at the man I loved, I realized our relationship was hanging by a thread, fraying under the relentless onslaught of Margot's cruelty. If I didn't act soon, I would lose everything. My home, my husband, and any chance at the life we'd dreamed of. The battle lines had been drawn, and I would have to fight with every weapon at my disposal if I hoped to survive the war Margot had declared. No matter the cost, I wouldn't go down without a fight. In the aftermath of the vicious newspaper story, the atmosphere at Winthrop Manor became suffocating. Rowan grew increasingly distant, torn between his loyalty to me and his lifelong conditioning by his manipulative mother. Meanwhile, Margot's underhanded tactics escalated in boldness and cruelty. It all came to a head one chilly autumn night. I had retired early to the bedroom Rowan and I shared, exhausted from another day of walking on eggshells in that accursed house. As I prepared for bed, a faint scratching sound came from the adjoining dressing room, like fingernails on wood. My heart pounding, I crept toward the noise, pushing open the dressing room door. That's when I saw it. A blazing trail of liquid snaking along the floor towards the piles of cast-off clothing. The unmistakable scent of kerosene filled my nostrils, seconds before the first lick of flame consumed the fabric. I stumbled back, choking on thick black smoke as the fire spread with terrifying speed. By the time I made it back into the bedroom, flames licked hungrily at the draperies and seared my lungs. I clawed desperately at the bedroom door, but some force held it firmly in place from the other side. "Help! Rowan! Please, someone help me!" I screamed, panic clawing at my throat as the room became an inferno around me. Then, over the roar of the blaze, I heard it, Margot's shrill laughter cutting through the chaos. That twisted cackle would haunt my nightmares for the rest of my days. Just as the searing pain and smoke threatened to overwhelm me, the bedroom door exploded inward with a thunderous crack. Rowan burst in, soot streaking his panic-stricken face, and pulled me bodily from the conflagration raging within. I don't remember much after that, only fragments of being rushed to the hospital, bandages binding my scorched skin, and the vacant look in Rowan's eyes as he watched over me in silence. When I finally regained my senses days later, Rowan sat slumped by my bedside, his expression hardening as I recounted the night's events. "She tried to kill you," he muttered in a hollow tone, the truth he had been so desperate to deny finally settling in his bones. "My own mother." I took his hand, ignoring the sting of my blistered skin, and made him meet my gaze. "She has to be stopped, Rowan, before this goes any further." His eyes smoldered with rage and anguish, I know. But even then, as he said the words, I could see the fractures splintering his loyalty, the product of a lifetime's manipulation threatening to reassert itself. Margot's twisted lies had sunk their hooks in deep, and I feared they might never fully release their grip on the man I loved. Rowan pressed his forehead to my hand, his next words barely more than a pained whisper. "I want to believe you, Alara, more than anything, but without proof, without knowing the full truth of what she's done." He trailed off, and in that moment, I felt more alone than I ever had in my life, as if I were drifting helplessly at sea with no anchor to hold me in place. It was then that I knew I would have to take matters into my own hands if I had any hope of surviving Margot's vendetta and salvaging what little remained of my crumbling life. Whatever the cost, I had to find a way to expose that vile woman's sins before they destroyed me completely. After the harrowing ordeal of the fire, I knew I couldn't remain a passive victim any longer. If I didn't take decisive action, Margot's malicious games would consume me completely. Rowan's loyalty was hanging by a frayed thread, and it was clear I couldn't rely on him to protect me from his mother's ruthless machinations. In the depths of that long, agonizing night following the inferno, a newfound resolve took root within me. I would gather whatever allies and evidence I could to finally expose Margot for the vicious, conniving snake she truly was, even if it meant facing her darkness head-on. My first step was contacting the local authorities and providing them with the damning letters and documents I'd uncovered, detailing Margot's financial crimes and the mysterious disappearance of Jonathan's former business partner. While the police seemed skeptical at first, the mounting pile of evidence against her could not be easily dismissed. Next, I reached out to an unlikely source, Francine, one of the manor's longest-serving maids who had endured Margot's cruel treatment for decades. Years of pent-up resentment bubbled to the surface as I revealed what I knew of Margot's misdeeds. "That wretched harpy has had her talons in me since I were a young girl," Francine hissed, her voice thick with hatred. "Blackmail, threats, you name it. She's a right evil one, that's for certainty." With Francine's help, I began uncovering even more of Margot's sordid secrets, illicit affairs, underhanded business dealings, and long-buried scandals that she'd worked tirelessly to conceal. It became increasingly clear that her entire life was a meticulously constructed web of lies and deceit. However, the final piece of the puzzle remained maddeningly elusive, the key to unraveling her twisted scheme against me and exposing her murderous intentions once and for all. That crucial lead finally came from an unexpected source. Margot's own estranged younger sister, Emma, who had been ostracized from the family years ago. I received an anonymous letter from her, detailing a particularly vicious confrontation that had driven her from Winthrop Manor in disgrace. "Margot has always been rotten to the core," Emma wrote in a shaky hand. "Petty, vindictive, utterly consumed by greed and status. But you must know the truth about what really happened the night our father died, the real reason she turned on me so viciously." My hands trembled as I read on, the final horrifying revelation unfolding like a serpent unfurling its coils. Emma claimed that on the night of their father's fatal heart attack, she had discovered Margot rifling through his safe and pocketing wads of cash and valuable documents. When Emma threatened to expose her sister's despicable actions, Margot had snapped, unleashing a torrent of vile accusations and threats that left Emma fearing for her very life. In that moment, I knew I held the linchpin, the damning evidence that could finally topple Margot's house of cards and reveal the true depravity lurking behind her meticulously crafted facade. Armed with Emma's testimony and the weight of everything I'd uncovered, I resolved to bring the full truth to light in a final, climactic confrontation. No more games, no more veiled threats or skirting the periphery of Margot's secrets. It was time to wield the power of her own sins as a weapon and cut her down to size once and for all. As I steeled myself for the impending battle, I could almost feel the gathering storm rumbling in the distance, heavy with the promise of reckoning. Margot's reign of terror and deception was nearing its end, by her own hand or by mine. The day of reckoning arrived sooner than I expected. I had summoned the estate's executors, the police, and a few trusted allies to bear witness as I finally stripped away Margot's veil of lies and deception. We gathered in the manor's grand hall, the vaulted ceiling seeming to press down with the weight of the impending confrontation. Rowan stood apart from the others, his expression haunted, as he steeled himself for the ugliness to come. Margot swept in fashionably late, as was her style, her haughty gaze sweeping over the assembled crowd with a mix of disdain and bemusement. Well, to what do I owe this merry little gathering? She arched an inquisitive eyebrow at me. Don't tell me my dear daughter-in-law is hatching another pathetic scheme for attention? Cut the act, Margot, I spat, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. Your game is up. We know everything. For a split second, a flicker of uncertainty danced across her face before the mask reasserted itself. I haven't the faintest idea what you're raving about, you delusional little. Save your venom, I snarled, retrieving a thick manila envelope with a trembling hand. We have all the proof we need of your lies, your crimes, your murderous intentions. As I began laying out the damning trail of evidence, the letters, the financial records, Emma's testimony, Margot's expression shifted from derision to outright fury. Her eyes bulged with unbridled rage as each new revelation compounded the last. That sniveling, traitorous whore, she screeched when I revealed Emma's words. How dare she slander me with these absurd fairy tales? Rowan took an involuntary step backward, as if her outburst had struck him bodily. It was the first crack in his staunch denial, the first glimmer of realization seeping through. These are nothing but malicious fabrications, Margot raged on, turning her vitriol towards the executors and police. I demand you remove these despicable liars from my home at once. But they stood firm, unmoved by her bluster as the weight of the evidence became insurmountable. With an animalistic shriek of pure fury, Margot turned on me, her immaculately manicured fingernails hooked like talons. You ungrateful, conniving little snake, she howled, spittle flying from her lips. This is all you're doing, isn't it? You could never be content with an ounce of my generosity. Well, I'll see you utterly destitute and ruined for this, I swear on my life. In that moment, she seemed to swell to an even more grotesque, inhuman form, a twisted, wrath-filled harpy clawing desperately at the unraveling threads of her meticulously crafted lies. Rowan moved to intervene, to shield me from his mother's incandescent rage, but I held up a hand to stop him. I would face her unbridled fury and let it consume itself to bitter ashes. It's over, Margot, I said, startled by the calm resolution in my own voice. No more lies, no more manipulations. Your house of cards has collapsed around you, and this time there's no escaping the consequences of your actions. For a long, breathless moment, she seemed on the verge of unleashing another torrent of rage and denial. But then, something shifted in her eyes. The fight bled out of her, letting the mask slip just a bit to reveal the hollowed, broken thing that lurked beneath. As the police moved to take her into custody, Margot didn't resist. She simply sagged in on herself like a deflating husk and allowed herself to be led away in contemptuous silence. Only then did the floodgates open for Rowan. He crumpled to the floor in racking sobs, all the years of anguish and torment finally spilling forth. As I gathered him in my arms, I knew both healing and hardship still lay ahead. Though Margot's twisted games had been exposed, shattered shards of her poisoned legacy still remained, fractures that would take years to mend if they ever fully could. But in that moment, allowing the cathartic release to wash over us both, I knew we would persevere. Margot's tyranny had been broken, and from the ashes of her ruination, perhaps some semblance of hard-won peace could finally take root. In the aftermath of Margot's explosive unraveling, the consequences of her depravity unfurled like a wildfire, consuming everything in its path. The evidence we had gathered proved irrefutable. Records of embezzlement, blackmail, corporate sabotage, and even mounting circumstantial ties to at least one suspicious disappearance. As the full extent of her sins came to light through a highly publicized legal prosecution, the reactions from her once vaunted social circles ranged from shock and revulsion to a perverse sort of schadenfreude. Who would have thought prim-proper Margot Winthrop was really such a degenerate monster? I overheard one well-coiffed matron murmur to her companion outside the courthouse. She always seemed so genteel and refined. Just goes to show you never really know someone, do you? For her part, Margot embraced her infamy with a sort of deranged defiance, lashing out with unrestrained vitriol at every turn. It was as if, now that her facade had been irreparably shattered, she delighted in flaunting the full breadth of her depravity. You imbeciles have no inkling of what I've sacrificed to maintain our family's status and legacy, she screeched during one courtroom tirade. You're fortunate I didn't have the lot of you disposed of the same way as that sniveling worm Jonathan's partner. A collective gasp went up from the gallery, feeding Margot's twisted delight like a starving flame. She turned her blazing eyes towards Rowan and me, and I felt an involuntary shudder at the naked loathing burning in their depths. Look at them, cowering like the gutless fools they are. You're the reason our noble lineage lies in ashes, the both of you. Weak-willed, pathetic. Her venomous diatribe was finally cut off by the stern banging of the judge's gavel. But even as the bailiffs muscled her away, Margot directed one last look of pure, unbridled hatred in our direction. A silent promise that this war was far from over, at least in her mind. Over the following weeks, Margot's downfall accelerated with dizzying speed. Asset seizures, criminal indictments, and the inexorable avalanche of public censure stripped away what tattered remnants of status and influence she had once wielded like a blunt instrument. Yet through it all, she remained utterly defiant and unrepentant. They'll all get what's coming to them, mark my words, she spat at reporters camped outside her palatial estate, now little more than an empty, echoing mausoleum. This is far from over, you mealy-mouthed vultures. Unfortunately for Margot, her rabid threats and unhinged ravings only further cemented her legacy as a once powerful matriarch, undone by her own boundless avarice and corruption. Society had turned its back on her with a mixture of pity and disdain, leaving her bitter screeds to be consumed by indifferent winds. On the day her sentencing was finally handed down, a staggering array of charges resulting in a harsh multi-year prison term, Margot unleashed a final, unrestrained torrent of malice. "Curse all of you," she howled, thrashing against the iron grip of the bailiffs as they tried to drag her from the courtroom. "Especially you, Alara. This is far from over, you hear me? I'll have my revenge if it's the last thing Whatever final, dire imprecation she intended was cut off as she disappeared through the door, the slam of iron against wood echoing through the court like a grim period. Silence hung heavy for several breathless seconds, and then the hushed murmurs began rippling through the gallery once more. A vile chapter had finally been closed. The damage caused by one woman's unchecked ambition and malice laid horrifyingly bare. As Rowan and I embraced in the wake of that sordid spectacle, I knew our own road towards healing and redemption would be long and arduous. The scars left by Margot's cruelty ran deeper than any inflicted wound. But at least now, at long last, we could begin to rebuild what she had so nearly destroyed. With the poison she had injected into our lives finally excised, there was a chance to nurture something new from the blighted, burned remains of our former existences. Those tender green shoots wouldn't take root overnight, of course. Deep, ravaging fires leave extensive scarring in their wake, but we would tend the ashes dutifully, allowing new life to gradually emerge, hushed and humble at first, then growing stronger, and more resilient with each passing season. It was the only way to banish Margot's toxic legacy once and for all, by cultivating the power to persevere where her hatred and corruption could only hope to wither and decay. In the weeks following Margot's sentencing, an eerie silence descended over Winthrop Manor. The echoing halls, once electric with her malicious presence, now felt like a vacuum, the stifling calm before the soft patter of new life begins to take tentative root. Rowan and I moved through those early days in a numb haze, going through the motions of setting the manor to rights, but still emotionally adrift from the cataclysm that had reshaped our lives so violently. We spoke in hushed tones, as if afraid to disturb some lingering malignant force hovering in the shadows. The servants, finally freed of Margot's tyrannical grasp, tiptoed about their duties with the same wary restraint as field mice anticipating the return of a prowling cat. Then, one crisp autumn morning, I awoke to find Rowan sitting at the foot of our bed, his shoulders hunched and head bowed beneath some invisible weight. "Rowan," I murmured, reaching out a hand to his arm. "What's wrong?" For a long moment he didn't respond, simply staring down at his calloused palms as if they belonged to a stranger. Finally, he drew a long, shuddering breath. "I spent so many years letting her gnaw away at my soul, Alara. No matter how vile she became, some part of me could never let go of the fantasy that she actually loved me deep down." Tears welled in his eyes, voice cracking with a lifetime's worth of hurt and disappointment. "She was my mother. I should have protected you from her poisonous lies and cruelty, but I was weak, blinded by delusions of the mother I so desperately wanted her to be." He looked up at me then, anguish etched in the creases of his face. "Can you ever forgive me?" In that moment, I felt my own emotions surge forward like a raging river breaking its banks, not just for the hell Margot had put us through, but for all the lost years we could have spent growing together instead of being warped and diminished by her hatred. I pulled Rowan into a fierce embrace as the dam finally burst, wave after wave of purging sobs racking our bodies in unison. We wept for the wounds that had been inflicted, the scars that would always remain, and the hollow ache of what could have been. But we also wept for the promise of what lay ahead, a new world where Margot's poisonous influence could never again take root. In the days and weeks that followed, we slowly began the work of reclaiming our lives. The manor underwent a top-to-bottom scouring and refurbishment, every last remnant of Margot's corruption purged as if by ritual cleansing. We let go of much of the staff that had enabled her cruelties, opting for a fresh start surrounded by new faces and loyalties. Gone were the dark furnishings, grim draperies, and oppressive decor, through which her malice had seeped like a miasma. In their place, we cultivated light, open spaces, and vibrant designs that spoke of rebirth rather than decay. Slowly, tentatively, the scars began to heal into the thick protective calluses of hard-won resilience and perseverance. What gave me the most solace and hope for our future, however, was witnessing Rowan's own metamorphosis. Where once Margot's manipulations had shaped him into a wavering, conflict-averse shell of a man, now I saw an indomitable pillar of resolve and integrity taking form. Gone were the haunted looks and furtive self-doubts. In their place stood a man embracing his role as master of his own destiny, unbowed by the specter of his mother's grievous wrongs. 5 years after Margot's ruination, Winthrop Manor had been virtually rebuilt from the ground up, retrofitted into not just a home, but a nexus for charitable endeavors aimed at empowering those who had once suffered as we had. Battered women's shelters, youth outreach initiatives, counseling programs, all thrived beneath the roof once shadowed by malice and oppression. We dedicated our newfound resources to cultivating the kindness and goodwill Margot had sought so voraciously to extinguish. And though I knew her poisoned roots would never be fully extractable, watching the fruits of our rebirth blossom with each passing year was the greatest victory I could have hoped to wrest from her clutches. On the eve of the annual charity gala we hosted at the manor, I caught Rowan staring pensively out the window towards the vast Sylvan estate grounds, a pensive smile playing across his weathered features. "Do you ever think about her?" he asked without turning to face me. "About your spite for Mother, I mean?" I considered the weight of his question for a long moment before answering. "She doesn't haunt my thoughts much these days," I admitted. Not out of spite or indifference, but rather resolve. Our eyes met then, a deep understanding passing between us. Margot's hatred very nearly destroyed everything, our relationship, our livelihood, our very souls. But we survived. We persevered through the darkness she inflicted and remade something beautiful from the ashes. I laced my fingers through his, marveling at how far we'd come. That is the greatest revenge we could ever claim over her bitterness and cruelty. Not by perpetuating the cycle of hurt, but by overcoming it and choosing to nurture the light she fought so desperately to smother. Hand in hand, we stood in comfortable silence, watching the golden rays of dusk gild the grounds, the lands and legacy we had reclaimed in the name of all that was good, just, and true. Our tomorrow was unwritten, filled with untold promise and possibility. But I knew, without a shred of doubt, that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would meet them as we had every other, overcoming hate with love, healing old wounds, and ensuring even Margot's darkest of legacies could never take permanent root.